welcome you to another deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, incredibly intense and fast-moving situation. The dramatic escalation between Iran and Israel just on a single day, June 19th, 2025.
It really was something. A lot happened very quickly.
Absolutely. And we've gathered quite a stack of sources. There's a detailed chronological timeline, official statements, social media comms, expert analysis, basically, to give you a shortcut to understanding this really pivotal day.
Yeah, our mission, if you like, is to unpack the key events, maybe some surprising shifts, and the critical global reactions, all unfolding in just a few hours.
Exactly. So what you're about to hear isn't just a simple recap. It's more of a breakdown of the immediate actions, the diplomatic maneuvers, and even, the shadow war that started playing out online.
We'll try to uncover some of those shifts and the ripples that went out globally from just those few hours of intense activity.
Okay, let's get into it then. Our sources tell us the day began with a bang, basically. Specifically around 11:50 a.m. GMT +3 on June 19th. Iran launched a pretty significant missile barrage targeting multiple Israeli cities.
Right, and the immediate impact was quite striking. We're talking Beersheba, Ramat Gan, Holon, all being hit.
Yeah, and in Beersheba, the Soroka Medical Center itself was directly struck. Caused extensive damage, apparently, to its surgical buildings.
Which is obviously hugely concerning. Thankfully, reports say evacuations were already underway there.
That definitely seems to have limited the injuries there, mostly to minor ones, which is fortunate given the circumstances. But it wasn't the same everywhere. In Ramadan, the sources say over 30 people were injured.
And Holon saw 18 wounded, with 3 of those listed as critical. So, this was a direct hit on civilian infrastructure, clearly including a hospital.
And what's fascinating, or maybe predictable, is the immediate spin from Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the IRGC.
Oh yeah, they jumped right on it. They claimed their strike targeted an Israeli military intelligence center that was near a hospital. They pointed to the Gaviam Negev Tech Park, which has IDF links, saying that was their true objective.
So right away, you get these completely conflicting narratives hitting the airwaves.
Exactly. It tells you just how crucial that information warfare piece is right from the very first moments of a conflict like this.
Okay, so given that level of devastation and these immediate clashing claims, how did Israel respond? What did they do?
Well, it was fast, really fast. Just 25 minutes later, our timeline shows around 12:25 p.m.
Right, that's when Israel bombed the Arak nuclear complex, specifically targeting a heavy water reactor, the kind designed for plutonium production.
And the IDF statement said the site was inactive, but crucially that it could be revived for weapons development. So hitting potential, not just current capability.
And they didn't stop at Arak, did they?
No, there were additional strikes reported hitting Natanz, which is another known nuclear development site, and also military factories, ones producing missile components.
So if we connect this to the bigger picture, what does this tell us? The sources seem to suggest a shift, maybe, in Israeli tactics here.
I think that's right. It looks like less of a simple tit-for-tat retaliation, It seems aimed more strategically at degrading Iran's future missile production and nuclear capabilities. It's moving beyond just immediate payback.
Right, towards hitting that long-term strategic potential. Was this something planned, do you think, or more of an immediate adaptation based on Iran's specific attack?
That's a good question. The sources kind of suggest it was an immediate adaptation, but one that likely leveraged pre-existing intelligence on these high-value targets. They knew where to hit to make a strategic impact.
And the long-term implication?
Well, it probably signals a heightened sense of vulnerability for Iran's key strategic assets. It suggests Israel might be moving towards a more, maybe preemptive stance against Iran's military-industrial complex, not just responding after an attack.
Okay, let's pivot to the diplomatic front, because the world reacted almost immediately, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The condemnation started flying pretty quickly.
The U.S. State Department, for instance, swiftly condemned that hospital attack. They called it a reckless escalation.
And you had the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy tweeting pretty strongly, too. Appalled by Iran's strike on Soroka Hospital, he said. Mentioned that deliberate attacks on medical facilities violate international law and called for immediate de-escalation.
Right, but Iran wasn't staying quiet either. Their foreign ministry used X, formerly Twitter, to defend the strike.
Yep, they pushed back, stating, "We targeted Zionist command centers exploiting civilian shields. Responsibility lies with the regime." Basically doubling down on their narrative.
And then, around 1:00 p.m., Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, he ordered the IDF to actually intensify strikes against strategic targets inside Iran, including government sites in Tehran.
Right, vowing to, quote, destabilize the Ayatollah's regime. That's a significant escalation in rhetoric.
And both he and Prime Minister Netanyahu jointly accused Iran of war crimes for targeting the hospital.
And this is where it gets really thorny, legally and ethically. You have both sides immediately throwing around war crimes accusations linked to civilian infrastructure.
Right.
It just underscores how quickly places like hospitals, residential zones, they become battlegrounds, not just physically, but in the narrative war too. Each side is trying to leverage international law for diplomatic advantage.
Beyond the strikes and the diplomatic blame game, what about the human cost and the immediate global response for citizens caught in the middle?
Yeah, that kicked in fast, too. By 1:30 p.m., so just about an hour and a half after the initial Iranian strikes, Australia started land evacuations from Israel.
Wow. They had 2,700 citizens registered for assistance there.
And China began evacuating its nationals, too, via the Egypt border, citing the deteriorating security. Japan deployed aircraft to Djibouti, getting ready for potential evacuations.
It really is a stark reminder, isn't it? How quickly ordinary lives get completely upended when things boil over like this.
Definitely. And meanwhile, inside Iran itself, reports indicated a near-total internet blackout was still ongoing, which severely limited any information getting out from the ground level.
That must make it incredibly difficult to know what's really happening.
Absolutely. But the speed of those multinational evacuations really demonstrates how severe the situation was perceived to be, the potential for it widening even further. It highlights how rapidly humanitarian concerns escalate, forcing governments worldwide to act fast to protect their people abroad.
So amidst all this intense military action and the evacuations, was anyone trying to cool things down? What diplomatic efforts were underway?
Well, there were attempts, yes. Around 2:00 p.m., Russia's Vladimir Putin renewed his offer to mediate. He stated something like, "A solution exists through negotiations. Moscow stands ready."
Okay, that's interesting. And crucially, EU-Iran talks were actually confirmed, right? For the very next day.
Yes, that's a key detail. Iran's foreign minister was set to meet with the UK, France, Germany, and the EU in Geneva on June 20th. So even amidst the fighting, that diplomatic track was apparently still open.
But not everyone was focused on de-escalation. Turkey's President Erdogan added a different perspective.
He did. He gave a televised address calling Netanyahu a regional arsonist, which is very strong language, and he demanded UN Security Council intervention.
So you have this real contrast.
Exactly. On one hand, you've got this urgent push, particularly from Europe and Russia, for dialogue. On the other, you have defiant rhetoric, inflammatory language from other regional players. And the analysis we looked at points out that U.S. ambiguity around this time, plus Iran's own defiance, probably played a role in stalling any immediate de-escalation efforts. It created this really complex, kind of messy diplomatic picture.
Okay, beyond the missiles and the diplomacy, what other fronts opened up? Our sources point to a pretty significant cyber and financial dimension unfolding that afternoon.
Yeah, between about 2:30 p.m. and 3:00 p.m., things got interesting online.
Get this. A hacker group calling itself Predatory Sparrow apparently stole $90 million from an Iranian crypto exchange, Nobitex.
And they specifically linked it to IRGC sanctions evasion efforts. They even vowed to release the exchange's source code. So a direct financial hit tied explicitly to the conflict.
And then, in a really dramatic turn, Iranian state TV itself was briefly hijacked.
That's right. Hackers managed to broadcast anti-regime messages for a short period, a very visible act of digital disruption.
What does this tell us about modern conflict?
Well, it really highlights how it's evolving, doesn't it? It's not just missiles and bombs anymore. The digital realm, financial systems are increasingly key battlegrounds. You can use them for destabilization, for information warfare, for economic disruption, sometimes with just as much impact as a physical strike.
Okay, so as the afternoon wore on, how did the U.S. position itself in all this chaos? And what was Iran's final message for the day?
Well, the U.S. position seemed deliberately ambiguous, maybe. At 3:30 p.m., Donald Trump tweeted something quite cryptic.
Right, it was. Nobody knows what I'll do on Iran. Maybe I act, maybe I don't. But they're begging to talk too late. Classic Trump style, perhaps.
Indeed. And White House sources were apparently letting it be known that Trump had reviewed attack plans, specifically for the Fordo nuclear site, but was essentially waiting for some kind of Iranian backdown.
But Iran didn't seem to be backing down at all.
Not publicly, no. Their defiance remained strong. State media recirculated an earlier warning from Supreme Leader Khamenei. U.S. intervention will cause irreparable damage.
And the IRGC social media.
They posted a video showing missile launches with a caption that read, "Ready to bury Zionists." Very defiant, very aggressive messaging right up to the end of the day.
So what does this all mean as the day closed?
Well, that U.S. policy uncertainty we mentioned, the analysis suggests it really did play a role. It created a kind of vacuum of predictability, kept everyone guessing. You couple that with Iran's very firm, very defiant public stance. It just set an incredibly tense stage for whatever might happen next. Neither side looked willing to blink first by sundown on the 19th.
Okay, just to wrap up this chronological deep dive, let's quickly touch on some key social media messages that really became part of the conflict's narrative during those peak hours, say between noon and 4 p.m.
Sure, it's like a digital echo of the physical conflict.
You had David Lammy from the UK repeating his stance on Twitter X. Appalled by Iran's hospital strike, this violates international law. Cease now. Very clear message.
Then you had Netanyahu on Telegram saying something like, "We will eliminate every threat. Iran's regime is crumbling," projecting strength and predicting collapse.
And Erdogan again on Twitter X. Netanyahu is dragging the Middle East into fire. UNSC must stop this, placing blame squarely on Israel's leader.
And finally, the IRGC, again on Telegram, just pure defiance. Zionist targets will burn. No safe place in Israel.
It's quite a snapshot, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It shows so clearly how these platforms become instant battlegrounds, shaping public opinion, assigning blame, projecting strength or defiance, all in real time. And these digital messages, they immediately influence diplomatic moves and public perception, sometimes just as fast as the military actions themselves.
Wow, what an incredibly intense, rapid escalation we've just unpacked from those sources. Just thinking about it, in only a few hours on June 19th, you had direct military strikes, strategic retaliations, an immediate humanitarian crisis kicking off.
Right, a flurry of high-stakes diplomacy, some pushing for peace, others pouring fuel on the fire with rhetoric.
And that whole shadow war playing out in cyberspace, too. And it's a lot packed into one day.
It really is. And the analysis of our sources, it showed us Israel quickly shifted tactics, didn't they, to really try and degrade Iran's missile production and nuclear potential. And Iran, in turn, seemed to adapt, too, using maybe longer-range missiles, possibly like the Sejil, fired from deeper within central Iran.
And that humanitarian aspect became such a battleground itself.
Crucially, yes. With both sides accusing the other of war crimes, highlighting the devastating impact on civilian infrastructure like hospitals, like residential areas. And overall, while Europe and Russia were pushing for talks, that combination of U.S. ambiguity and Iranian defiance seemed to stall any immediate de-escalation on that specific day.
Yeah, leaving the whole region just hanging in this really precarious state of tension.
Exactly.
This deep dive, it really shows how quickly a regional conflict can just pull in global actors, complex responses across military, diplomatic, cyber fronts all at once.
It's the nature of modern conflict, unfortunately. Very interconnected, very fast.
So for you, our listener, maybe here's a provocative thought to chew on after this. Given how civilian infrastructure became such a primary target, and you had those immediate accusations of war crimes flying from both sides, what does this single day really tell us about the future of warfare?
That's a heavy question.
And maybe also, how might that ongoing ambiguity from major powers, like the U.S. in this case, either fuel or maybe deter future escalations, especially now that cyber warfare is so clearly, so prominently in the mix?
Yeah, definitely something to think about long after this deep dive is over. The rules seem to be changing, or at least being tested very publicly.